Did cell phones ruin all tension in horror movies? And when you're writing a horror film, how do you get rid of a cell phone? Like, how do you make that not? And there's always the classic, like, oh, we're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no cell service.
Yep.
What is your go-to?
First of all, I don't think that it's like ruined the tension. It has made the job a lot harder.
It's like something you have to acknowledge.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like you like I find myself getting sort of wrapped up in acknowledging it too much, where I'm like, oh, I gotta explain the cell phones and stuff, and it's like to some degree, sometimes you can almost. I mean, again, it depends on the circumstances, but you can kind of ignore it at times and just pretend like, well, it's not an option here. But other times, yeah, you definitely have to like explain it away somehow, where it's like, well, the cell phone gets broken, or they can't get to it, or there is no cell service, or something. You know, on the other hand, I think that there's also sometimes opportunities created by them too.
Yes.
Overall, I'd say it makes the job of writing stuff harder.
Well, I think what you said is true, is like maybe to you and me, it feels like, man, we got to address this cell phone and how it's not solving the problem that we set up here. But kind of what I want to try moving forward, which I feel like I've seen in some short films or films, is just like pretending they don't exist.
Yeah.
It's just like, if you never acknowledge that it's there, it's not like set up to be something that saves you.
Right. Yeah. Like if you have somebody in the scene like texting and then they put their phone down and then later they just don't try to call the cops with it when they're about to be murdered, then it's like, you know, then it's fair game for getting called out on. But if it's never established, I think there's totally opportunities where you just kind of eliminate that from the scenario.
Another thing that it's kind of made harder or maybe made easier is like flashlights. I felt like in old horror movies, like, oh man, I gotta have a flashlight in a drawer somewhere and pull that out. But now they just have a flashlight on them. Yeah. And so I feel like when I've been writing things in the past, it's like, oh, everybody has a cell phone. Now they're going to use a cell phone for a flashlight. Yeah. It's like, why aren't they calling the cops with the cell phone? Why aren't they calling for help? And so I think what I'm going to try to do moving forward, at least for a while, I'm just going to mess around with the idea of cell phones just don't exist. I'm thinking mostly of like my short films.
Sure.
Where I don't know why I somehow get a cell phone in like every single one. And I'm like, why did I do this to myself? They're annoying to shoot.
Yep.
It's like, I got to have it on the right screen. He's got to be texting a person. The name's got to be correct. Yeah. And like, now I want a notification to come in at this moment. I was like, oh my gosh.
Well, they're so boring too. Like, like they're not fun to shoot and they're really not fun to watch either, particularly, you know, it's like, and you have to, it's kind of a struggle to try to make it interesting, which is why I really enjoyed when Sherlock, for example, had all of the, you know, they went to the sort of like MoGraph route of text popping up in the scenes and being like motion tracked to stuff sometimes, I think, or whatever it is they did to try to immerse you in that without being like, okay, now we cut back to the phone screen and you read this text.
I think they did that in House of Cards too. And it was probably like a cool creative way that you could like, instead of cutting away from your actor's like interesting face to a cell screen that's just like a blue light and it's like, you got to like, you could still see the actor in the scene interacting with the text while taking in the information. And that's, there's creative ways that hopefully people will keep innovating. And cell phones are always kind of, they're not really a pet peeve, but I'm just like, man, they're kind of annoying, just like having to acknowledge them.
And I think you're in a much better place to not acknowledge them in a short, because you're usually kind of contained to one scenario. Cell phones maybe not in the room, not in a place where they can get to it at this moment. A little harder with the whole feature where you're like, here's them navigating their lives in multiple scenes and multiple days, and never a cell phone comes up. Yeah. It's a little less plausible there unless again, you're going for some sort of specific like alternate reality version of something or whatnot.
Totally.
Well, there's also this balance between explaining that stuff away and also getting in the character's head and figuring out like when that would actually become a component of your scene. Like when would they actually take a cell phone out and call the cops?
Yeah.
Because I definitely feel like there's been times where even myself, I've been watching something and it's like, come on, just call the cops now or something. Yeah. But you think about yourself in that scenario And if you're the one who's like, I hear creepy noises in my house, your first instinct isn't going to be like, well, better call the police. It's like, no, it's probably
So true.
You know, it could be like a raccoon or under your house or
The
something.
amount of times I hear creepy sounds and I inspect them, I'm like, I'm a horror movie character. Like, I'm always inspecting them.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm never just like, nah, I'm just going to stay under the covers. I'm always like, oh, here comes the flashlight. I'm going to go check it out.
Guess we better split up.
Yeah, seriously. It's kind of true.
That's the thing about it, is that because we're living in a reality where we're not expecting a monster or whatever, it's kind of it's not your first instinct to call the cops. It's not your first instinct to like grab the shotgun. It's just it's like, well, that's kind of, because I've literally never called the cops over a scary noise, and I've heard a lot of scary noises in my life, you know?
And it's also, it's not like every time you have a plot or a scenario, it's not every time a cell phone is going to save the day.
No.
There's a lot of plots and things that can happen in your movie that cell phone changes nothing. Doesn't do anything. So
or it you know, it adds a layer of complication and complexity to, you know, in what, I mean, again, it's just completely a hypothetical, but there are things that it can add to a story as well. Now you have this mode of communication, and you can call anybody at any time. What does that mean for your story? You know, that could be a good thing as well. But for a lot of traditional scenarios, you know, it seems like it must have been a lot easier in the 70s and 80s or whatever, when it was just like, nope, you're out in the desert and there's a killer out there with you.
I guess
figure it out, you know.
The same kind of thing happened in old movies where they pull up the telephone line. It's been cut.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yep.
So they were dealing with it back then. They probably had their own podcast. They're like, what's the deal with phones? They ruined everything.
Yep. Yeah. The old version of where there's no cell service was like, oh, the car doesn't start. You know?
The car doesn't start. The tires are slashed. So
it's always some problem you got to figure out. And that can, it's a problem solving thing at the end of the day. So your job is to try to get around it creatively and figure out a new way to just, you know, put your characters further in the fire despite it.